Welcome to the start of our coverage of RxJava's single class. We'll focus initially on key factor method operators that are defined in this class. These operators create single objects in various ways, and we'll be focusing on the just and fromCallable factor method operators. The just operator is used to create a new single that will emit the specified item. This item is passed as a parameter, and it's the one and only item that will be emitted to onNext. The just method returns a mono that's captured at instantiation time. In other words, it's going to make just behave eagerly, and it therefore will always run in the thread where the assembly is performed. I'll show you that in just a second, what that means. Keep these semantics in mind that just is an eager operator when we talk later about the subscribe on operator. This factor method can be used to adapt non-reactive input sources into the overall reactive model. And here's an example that illustrates what it means to be eager. So this particular example will use single just in order to create a single that reduces a big fraction. And you can see the example when we get to the case study at the end of this lesson. As you can see, we're passing a parameter in there, and it's going to be big fraction dot reduce unreduced fraction. So we'll take an unreduced fraction and reduce it. And this value will be captured eagerly at instantiation time. In other words, in the thread of control that's doing the assembly of this particular chain of methods on the single. And the value will be returned for all subscribers. There's no lazy binding, there's no late binding, there's no dynamic binding of this particular method. Project Reactor has a just method in its mono class that works the same way. You can say mono.just instead of single.just. And once again, you can pass in this case, an unreduced big fraction, which will be reduced in the thread that's doing the call at instantiation time when the assembly is put together for that chain of calls. Let's take a look at another factor method operator defined in the single class. This is the fromCallable operator. This factor method also can be used to create a single of type T. The single's value is produced, however, instead of passing in the parameter directly to the method, it's passed by a provided callable supplier. A callable, as you may recall, is a Java 5 capability that's essentially a functional interface. So it returns a value. It returns the single that's emitted by the supplier, the callable, that's passed as a parameter at runtime. So in other words, this particular method, this particular operator is going to be lazy. It's going to make its decision at runtime instead of at instantiation time. Again, keep in mind the semantics of fromCallable when we talk about subscribe on later, because that's often what you want to use in the context of subscribe on. You want to actually use fromCallable in order to get things to run in the proper thread. This factor method is also used to adapt non-reactive input sources into the reactive model. So here we have a call to single fromCallable that creates a single that reduces a big fraction. Once again, we'll look at that example in more detail a little bit later when we get into the case study. And unlike just, fromCallable is lazy. So it invokes the callable parameter at the time of a subscription, and therefore each different subscriber to this particular single will receive a potentially very different value when the callable is invoked. Now, in this particular case, we're returning a reduced big fraction, but you could do something that would involve runtime analysis or runtime dynamic creation of variables, like using a random number generator, for example. And each time someone subscribed, they could potentially get a different value using fromCallable. In contrast, the just operator works eagerly, so the value is captured at instantiation time. So the semantics are a little bit different. Project Reactor has a fromCallable method on its mono class that works essentially the same way. And it basically does a lazy evaluation at runtime based on the callable that's passed in, which is invoked in the appropriate context. So that's the end of our overview of key factor method operators in the single class. And we'll talk about other things as we go further on that complement these particular methods.